Okay, let's add some annotations to our application. In addition to the image viewer and thumbnail viewer, DotImage also has a web annotation viewer. We can drag that onto the page just like the other two, and it will add in the references that we need. Since it extends the image viewer, it can be used anywhere you use an image viewer, so I'll just replace the image viewer we had before with this annotation viewer. And so that all of our code can stay exactly the same, I'll just give it the same name that our image viewer had, Web Image Viewer 1. But otherwise use all of the same attributes. And if I run the application, you'll see it runs exactly as before. I'm not using any of the annotation features yet, but it does everything that the image viewer can do. Panning, and it's automatically associated with the thumb. Okay. So let's look at some of those properties specific to the annotation viewer. One thing that we'd want is for annotations made on the annotation viewer to automatically show up on the thumbnail viewer. So I'll auto-link it to the thumbnail viewer, and then go to the thumbnail viewer, and I'll click on that, and set its show annotations property to true. So now any annotations put onto the annotation viewer will automatically show up on the associated thumbnail viewer without any more code. I'm going to add another button. I'll copy the DSkew button and I'll name this button Sticky Note button, and we'll use this to add sticky notes to our annotation viewer. Again, I'll set the onClick event to a local JavaScript function that I'll write, and we'll call that Sticky Note. And now we'll write that function. So, in order to author a new annotation, what we'll do is we'll just tell the annotation viewer to go into author mode, and then tell it which annotation you'll be authoring. The easiest way to do that is to set up annotations by name on the server side beforehand, and then tell the annotation viewer that it's authoring an annotation, and then give it its name. So first we'll set the interact mode to authoring, and then we'll tell it that we want to create an annotation, and that the annotation we want is based on text data and has the name Sticky Note. So we'll create a specific text data object with the name Sticky Note on the server beforehand, and this will set up the annotation viewer to creating one. And then, since that's done asynchronously, we'll set up a function to be called when it's completely done, called onAnnotationCreated. We'll write onAnnotationCreated. Again, this is called when the annotation is completely finished being authored. And we'll just set the interact mode back to modify, which means that you can use the mouse to move and resize annotations, but it will no longer create them. And this is the default mode that we're in when we first bring up the annotation viewer. And then we'll just set the annotation created call back to an empty function, so that okay, if we go to the page behind, we just need to create this sticky note text data object. So we'll create a helper function called create default annotations, and then we'll create the stub. And then all we need to do is create a text data object, set it up to have the properties that we want a sticky note to have, and then add that to our default list of default annotations. So I'll just bring in this the annotate namespace. And you have to also make sure that you have the system.drawing that namespace, since we use colors from there. And here we go. We'll create a text data object. And we're going to give it some default text that will show up when you create them. It'll say double click to edit. This could be blank, or it could be any other text you'd want to be the default text when someone puts on a sticky note. We're going to set the font size. It's 24. And then we'll set the fill to use a yellow brush. And then here's the important part. We have to give it the same name that we used on the JavaScript side. So we called that sticky note. I'll go back here for a second. We're matching this name here, sticky note. And that will be based on this name property on the server side. And then all we have to do is add it to the default annotations collection inside of the web image, the Annotation Viewer. And that's all we should need to do to run this. Let's do that and create a sticky note annotation. So, click the sticky note button. I'm in author mode, and now I author a sticky note. If I double click it, we handle all of the editing and make sure that the annotations on the server are updated with this information so that you could store it. We also handle allowing the user to resize and move it around. And we'll store all those edits on the server for you. And we update the thumbnail to show the same annotation. We take care of resizing the annotation when you zoom it, and we handle scrolling. And so now that we've done one annotation, why don't we do another? Adding another one is pretty easy. Well, let's do a highlight. And it's basically the same thing. We have a button. We'll call that highlight button. We'll give it the value highlighter. And then set the onClick event to call a JavaScript function called highlight. And now I can use a function just like sticky note to do that, and the only difference is that it's based on a different data class. We'll use a rectangle data for that. So let's change this to rectangle data, and the name we're going to use is highlight, and then we'll create a similar kind of code to here, so we'll just copy that, and then like I said, we're going to use a rectangle data, it doesn't need to have any argument to start with, and then we'll just call that highlighter, and then it doesn't need a font, but we'll set its translucent property to true, since you want to be able to see through this. And we'll give it a fill and we'll create the color by giving it a 127 alpha, and then we'll use green. So it'll be kind of a see-through green. And then the name, of course, we have to match to the name we're using in the JavaScript, which was highlighter. Or highlighter. I'll just change this to highlighter to match. And we'll just make sure we use the correct object name everywhere, and then add that object to the default, and we're done. And so let's run that. And we'll put our sticky note on, and then we'll put on our highlighter. We'll shrink that down a little so that we can see what's going on. And we can put on a highlight, resize it. I'll deskew the underlying image so that this matches up better, and resize it to fit. And we've got our annotations.